Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another week of the Sports Luck Podcast Fantasy Football Outlook. I'm your host, Ben Mossdaller, and we are finishing up the AFC this week with the AFC West. If you want to, go check out my AFC North, South, and East videos where I break down every team and let you know who fantasy-wise I'm drafting, maybe who I'm staying away from, and how I think they're going to do on the season. So today, of course, we finish out the AFC with the AFC West. In the coming weeks, we'll jump to the NFC and do each of those divisions, followed by a rankings, sleepers and busts, and all kinds of stuff to prepare you for the season coming up at the end of that, right before the start of the season and the end of the preseason, which is where I like to draft because then you get to see who, rookie wise, or if you have new quarterback wide receiver combination on new teams, how they do in the preseason to see how you can better draft and better your chances of winning your league. So let's jump into the AFC West here, and we're going to start with the Denver Broncos, who finished below 500 for 5 years in a row now and finished last in the division for the second year in a row. This offseason, they made a huge trade, of course, to acquire my guy Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks to lead the team. So can they jump over 500 and break that streak this season? Well, let's take a look at the team first. And we're going to start out with that fantastic quarterback, Russell Wilson, former 10-year veteran. Last season, Wilson missed a few games, which was the first time he has in his career, after a 10-year career. That's incredible. Wilson finished with only 25 touchdowns, but only threw 6 interceptions. Great stat line there. That was best for quarterback 15. Now, healthy, he would have been right around top 10, right around 10 in fantasy last season. Now, Wilson is surrounded by good wide receivers. And I mean, you could argue maybe the core is maybe not, you don't have the veterans like Tyler Lockett and the great DK Metcalf, but he's got a nice core of wide receivers there and young guys, and we'll talk about them shortly. He has a better defense than Seattle the last few years, and he's got better rushers. Usually he's got a rush with the ball up there in Seattle, dealing with a lot of injuries with Chris Carson up there the last few years. Now he's got 2 great guys, and we'll talk about them here in a minute as well. Currently, he's going as the quarterback 11, which I think is good value for Russ. Now, he's always in the MVP talk, and he could definitely lead this team to a potential division win, in my opinion. So I like Russell Wilson as a quarterback. I think the ADP is perfect for him. I think he will go a little bit higher up the board in the top 10 just because of how great Russell Wilson is. And maybe I'd rather take him over some riskier guys at the ADP. But I mean, last year, that's where he was going for, is right around the QB 10 if he was healthy. This season on a new team, I think that's a great place to put him, just because he's got to get adjusted to the new offense and new guys around him. So loved Russell Wilson on and off the field, and definitely a guy at the ADP that I would draft. Let's talk about those running backs now, and Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. Now, last season, both running backs contributed nicely. Williams finished running back 17 with 903 yards and 4 touchdowns, and Melvin Gordon was running back 19, only 2 spots behind him, with 15 more rushing yards and 4 more touchdowns with 8. Now, Williams was slightly better in the receiving game, so in PPR, definitely a better play. Javonte Williams really kicked it on at the end of the last season, which is why a lot of guys like him. But I think that people are overhyping Javonte Williams. Now you have a guy in Russell Wilson that will run the ball a little bit more than Drew Lock. And you got 2 running backs. They're still going to feed Melvin Gordon, in my opinion. I think Williams does get an extended role. But currently, Williams is going as a running back 12, which I think is way too high for him right now. I mean, he did finish as the running back 17 last season, and we definitely think that he's going to improve in touchdowns. But I still don't feel comfortable with some running backs going around him that I'd rather have. Now, Melvin Gordon, a running back 38, is probably the better value. Again, he takes a little bit of a cut this season, probably not as many touchdowns, but I think he's still in the top 30. And right now, they're listing him as running back 38. So at the ADP, I'd rather take Gordon than Williams. I know that a lot of fantasy experts would disagree with that, but I just don't think that Javonte Williams is going to be a top 10 running back this season. And the guys that are going around him, there's a couple other guys that I'd rather have at the ADP or take some risk on. So that's kind of the running back situation, in my opinion, in Denver. Melvin Gordon, he still got it. So he's going to take into some of what Javonte Williams could truly be. And that's kind of my concern. Let's talk about that good wide receiver core that I was talking about in Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Tim Patrick. Now, again, no Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf, but overall, it's a pretty good core. Very young, very talented. But the question is in fantasy, who will stand out? We take a look at last season. Tim Patrick was the leader. He was wide receiver 41 overall in fantasy, 53 receptions, 734 yards, 5 touchdowns. Now Sutton finished wide receiver 43, 2 spots behind him, with 58 receptions, 5 more than Patrick, 776 yards, which is more than Patrick, but only 2 touchdowns, which is where it took a hurting there. Now, Jerry Jeudy was supposed to be the guy, but was hurt most of last year. We take a look at the ADP. Jerry Jeudy right now is actually going ahead of Sutton by 1 spot, wide receiver 25 to Sutton's wide receiver 26, and Tim Patrick, wide receiver 64. Now, again, this is why you wait to draft until after preseason, because we got to see what kind of connection is going to be there between Russell Wilson and these receivers. But what I've read is that he really likes Cortland Sutton. And definitely at that ADP, I think that's pretty fair. And I think that he will improve definitely from last season and have probably at least 6 touchdowns compared to the 2. And he'll have probably 70 receptions, which is a good ADP to grab Sutton. In my opinion, I would wait, but if I had to draft right now, I'd take Sutton over Jeudy slightly. And Tim Patrick has value there at wide receiver 64 because we saw what he did last season, wide receiver 41. And potentially Tim Patrick could be the guy to jump out. We don't know yet. So I'd avoid these wide receivers until after the preseason, see who stands out, and then kind of go from there. Because somebody's going to have fantasy value. Metcalf and Lockett were both top 15 wide receivers the last 2 seasons. And that's all because of Russell Wilson. So you're not going to go wrong with getting 2 of these guys. But my question would be at the ADP, is Jeudy worth the pick or Sutton since they're going back to back? Lastly, Albert, and I'm not even going to pronounce the last name, and I should have looked this up, but we're just going to call him Alberto, as many people call him, is the tight end who finished tight end 27 last season, 33 receptions, 330 yards, only 2 touchdowns. Currently, his ADP is tight end 23, which I think is fair. I think he has a slight improvement with Wilson, but I mean, Wilson really lately hasn't been using the tight ends that great. So I'd be staying away from this guy even as a backup due to the talented wide receiver core. And, Javonte Williams will be getting more looks in the pass catching out of the backfield. So I will be staying away from Alberto this season. Now, the defense, they're pretty average. They look to improve this season with the draft. Some pros is that they had Russell Wilson, who will lead them to more victories for sure over Drew Lock. The cons is the defense isn't as good as it should be or as it was in the past, but Russell Wilson's used to that. So last year they went 7-10. I projected 6-11, which is pretty close, 1 game off. This season, I think they jumped to 11-6. Taking a look at the schedule, they do have an advantage playing in Denver with their home games due to the elevation. So I think that's very beneficial. So I do think they make that 4-game jump positively. They jump over the 500 mark, and they're in contention to win this division. So next we jump to the Kansas City Chiefs, who went 12-5 last season and won 6 consecutive division titles. The division is getting tougher, though, so the question is, can they make it 7 in a row? Well, let's talk about Patrick Mahomes, one of the greatest of our generation, besides Tom Brady. Mahomes finished quarterback 4 last season with 4,839 yards, which was 4th best, 37 touchdowns, which was tied for 4th, and 13 interceptions. Mahomes added 2 rushing touchdowns as well. Now, Mahomes threw his most interceptions in a season last season, but this was his second best season with passing yards. So he threw more. So there's some more interceptions. Mahomes has now finished back-to-back seasons as a quarterback 4 and should once again be in that top 5 position there, which right now his current ADP is quarterback 2, which I think is fair. He's been very consistent. But in my opinion, and we'll talk about this guy in a little bit here, I think Justin Herbert I'd rather have there than Mahomes. I would draft Herbert over Mahomes. Why? Because I think Herbert's improving more. He was a 5,000-yard passer last season. He's got the same guys back. I think where Patrick Mahomes is going to maybe not, why I don't think he's going to be maybe quarterback 2 is because he has a all new wide receiver core. Juju Smith-Schuster, Valdez Scantling, that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So that's kind of my concern with Mahomes, but maybe that means that he's going to do more. He's going to maybe run a little bit more, maybe have a couple more rushing touchdowns. But I'm still drafting Patrick Mahomes. I mean, if you can get Patrick Mahomes in the, I don't know, say 4th, 5th round, I think that's fair. I think that's great. I'd want him on my team. But if I saw Herbert on the board and Patrick Mahomes, I think I'd lean a little bit more towards Herbert. And we'll talk about the Chargers here in a little while. Let's talk about the running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who finished running back 39 last season, 517 yards, 4 touchdowns. He did add 2 receiving touchdowns, but it wasn't a big feature in the passing game. Helaire did miss 7 games, which he could have been closer to 1,000 yards rushing if he was healthy, and definitely probably closer to maybe 10 touchdowns if healthy total. So if you give him 4 more touchdowns, we'll just give him 4 more. You give him about 400 more yards, he would have finished as the running back 23 last season. Right now, he's going as the running back 29, which I think is a good value, going around a lot of backups in the 7th, 8th round, A.J. Dillon being around there, Kareem Hunt. I would rather take Damian Harris over him because I think he'll get more of the volume there. But other than that, I think he's a good pickup at the ADP. They also got to worry about Ronald Jones, who they have now as a backup that could get more touches. But Clyde will still be the guy. And I think the ADP is pretty fair for him. And I think that they could look to go to him more, especially with the new wide receivers, and try to get him more involved in the running game as they didn't do in past seasons. But now he's being drafted at the ADP where he should, which is why I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not a bad pickup in the 7th or 8th round. Now let's talk about the wide receivers. We got to talk about Juju Smith-Schuster, Mecole Hardman, Sky Moore, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And let's talk about Juju first. He was injured most of the last season. Marquez Valdez-Scantling finished wide receiver 75 with the Packers only having 3 touchdowns. Sky Moore is an interesting draft pick. I was hoping the Steelers would take, but they took Pickens instead. He's the rookie out of Western Michigan who they drafted in the 2nd round, who had 95 receptions, almost 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns last season. He's a speedy guy. He'll be a guy to likely replace Tyreek Hill on the deep ball, which makes him intriguing. Hardman finished as a wide receiver 46 last season, 59 receptions, under 700 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, again, we got to look at the ADP. Juju, wide receiver 35. Moore, wide receiver 55. Hardman, wide receiver 58. And Valdez-Scantling, wide receiver 59. All pretty close there. Because guess what? People don't know who Patrick Mahomes is going to like. Now, at the ADP, I would take Juju because he's, I think, the most talented, in my opinion, out of all of them. But I don't know if that's where Mahomes is going to go, what the connection is going to look like there, which is why you wait until the preseason after it's over to see where Mahomes was throwing to more. It could be Mecole Hardman because he's used to throwing to him. But it could also be Juju, who's the top guy they went out to get, Sky Moore, and maybe Valdez-Scantling. So if you take a look at Moore, Hardman, and Scantling that are all within 4 of each other. I'd rather have more at the ADP because I think there's a lot of upside with his speed. And he'll be most likely the replacement of Hill on that deep ball. Now, this is a guy that I think is going to benefit the most out of the new wide receiver core, and that's Travis Kelce. Kelsey's always either the top tight end or in the top 3 in fantasy. He finished tight end 2 last season, 92 receptions, which was second, 1,125 yards, which was second, and 9 touchdowns, which was tied for first. All were behind Mark Andrews, who finished first overall. The current ADP is Kelce is going the second tight end overall in the 3rd and 4th round, which last season he was going in the 1st and 2nd round. He's going 1 spot behind Andrews. So I currently think, though, that Kelce will finish tight end 1 this season. Now, there's not much to say that Andrews won't, and he won't repeat on that season. But again, Kelce is the one that's going to benefit from these new wide receivers because that is going to be a safety valve, and that's going to be the guy that Mahomes is most comfortable throwing the ball to. So he is definitely worth the pick at the ADP, and you got to compare him to some wide receivers and say, look, he's going to get that volume. I'd rather have him than some wide receivers around the ADP. So if Kelce falls me in the 3rd and 4th round, I'd take him. The problem is, how early will tight ends go? And some people might take Kelce first. And once a tight end like Andrews or Kelce gets off the board, everybody's going to start jumping on tight ends. So if you don't have a good spot to draft the tight end, like 3-4 of the top guys go before you, then I'd just wait and try to get, wide receiver running backs in those rounds instead. Tight ends is always a waiting game to see who bites first. Same with quarterbacks. Quarterbacks you can wait a little bit longer for and get a just as good as a guy than tight ends. But if he can wait till the 3rd or 4th round, I'd gladly take Travis Kelce, and I think that he will finish tight end 1 this season. Now, their defense improved last season. They were good, so draft them. The pros are that the Chiefs still have Mahomes to guide them, but again, a con is the best wide receiver in the game, Tyreek Hill, is gone, and now they have 3 new wide receivers to work with on the offense with an average running game. Last season, they go 12-5. I projected 15-2. I overhyped them last season. This season, I think they take a slight step back. They have some tougher games this season, and I think they finished 10-7. I don't think they win the division this season. I think that they don't get the 7 division wins in a row. And again, I think they take a little bit of a step back. They're still a talented team. They're still going to make the playoffs, and they can still make a run in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to the Super Bowl. But I do think they take just a slight step backwards just because all of the new pieces there is on that offense. Let's now jump to the Las Vegas Raiders, who have a lot of hype on them this season after signing, well, in my opinion, the best wide receiver. I know I said that for Hill, but best wide receiver in the game in Devontae Adams. The Raiders finished 2nd in the division last season, right behind the Chiefs, having their 2nd best season since 2022, but their 2nd best season, I think maybe, I meant to say 2002, maybe. They finished 10-7. They were 12-4 in 2016. Let's jump to the quarterback, and that's Derek Carr. Carr enters his 9th season with the Raiders, finishing last season with his most passing yards yet of 4,804, which is 5th best. 23 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, which the interceptions were tied for 3rd worst. And that was the most of his career. But this was good enough for quarterback 14 last season. Now you had Devontae Adams. A guy in Hunter Renfrow stepped up late in the season. Darren Waller was hurt for some of the season. Derek Carr will look to improve those those numbers since he isn't a running quarterback. Right now, going at ADP quarterback 13, which I think is a good value. He's got a lot of upside this season. I think he could potentially finish in the top 10. If he isn't taken as a starter, he would definitely be a solid backup. I'd love to have him as a backup and put him with somebody that I'd get earlier on, of course. But right now at the ADP, he's going as a backup quarterback. So again, I'd love to take him there, but I think he has a lot of upside. with Devontae Adams, Darren Waller coming back healthy, and Hunter Renfrow really coming alive towards the later part of the season. When we talk about the running backs, we got to look at Josh Jacobs. Jacobs played in 15 games last season and still finished as the running back 12 with 872 yards, 9 touchdowns. Jacobs also had 54 receptions, which was 5th best out of the running backs. Now, everybody was concerned with Kenny and Drake taking over some time, but Jacobs still performed well last season, and this was his first season under 1,000 yards rushing. Currently, he's being drafted right behind Zeke Elliott at running back 19, which I think is a good spot for him. That, you know, if he has a healthy season, he could be a top 10 running back. I would probably slightly take Zeke over him because I think Zeke had a rough year last season. But Jacobs, I think a lot of people are kind of low on and are not really excited about, even though last season finished running back 12. But I like him. You know, maybe he takes a reduced touchdown load to maybe 7 touchdowns or 8 touchdowns. But 54 receptions is not bad at all at the running back spot. That will slightly go down a little bit because of Waller being healthy, because of the addition of Devontae Adams, which is why I think he's pushed back to running back 19. But definitely some good value there for Josh Jacobs at that ADP. Now let's talk about those talented wide receivers with Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow. After 8 seasons with the Packers, Devontae Adams said, "I'm joining the Raiders, try and help them win a division title and hopefully a Super Bowl." He's one of the best wide receivers in the league. Last season finished wide receiver 2, 123 receptions, which was second best behind Cooper Kupp, 1,553 yards, which was third best, and 11 touchdowns, which was 5th best. 2020, Adams was a wide receiver 1 in fantasy with 18 touchdowns. So he's been a top 2 wide receiver the last 2 seasons. Take a look at Hunter Renfrow. He surprised a lot of people. He was my hero in fantasy football, him and Mark Andrews last year. Love Hunter Renfrow. I am tempted to get a Hunter Renfrow jersey all because of last season, but he finished wide receiver 10, 103 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 9 touchdowns, which was tied for 7th. Now, both wide receivers have to share receptions with Darren Waller, who's one of the best tight ends in the league as well. So those reception numbers, I think, for both of those wide receivers will go down. Renfrow is unlikely to hit 1,000 yards again, as Adams will now be the main guy, and Adams' receptions will go down closer to 100, I think, from 123. The current ADP is Adams wide receiver 2 and Renfrow wide receiver 29. Now, Adams has the talent to easily finish his top 3, but he does have a downgrade at quarterback, in my opinion, over the MVP Aaron Rodgers. And there's just more mouths to feed than we had to deal with in Green Bay. Because you take a look at the Green Bay receiving core, it's not as good as what Vegas has now. So I think Adams is a top 10 wide receiver, but he will take a slight hit. And I think that people are drafting him a little bit too high. I know he's Devontae Adams, but I think he'll be closer to maybe wide receiver 5 or 6, maybe. Renfrow, I think he has the capability to finish in the top 20. I think wide receiver 29 is a little bit too low for him. He won't have the looks, but I think that Renfrow is a good value at that ADP. I think he's even going around like Tyler Lockett, which with the huge downgrade in quarterback play there, I'd rather take Renfrow as the wide receiver 2, maybe consider him wide receiver 3 if you throw Waller in there as far as receptions. But definitely interesting wide receivers here. And Adams, a guy that I really love, and I really hope that he does stay as a top 3 wide receiver, even with the slight downgrade at quarterback. Now let's talk about Darren Waller. We brought him up a lot. Waller, unfortunately, was hurt for a chunk of the season last year, which hurt his stats, but he was still on pace to get over 1,000 receiving yards if healthy, but his touchdowns were low, finishing with only 2. Waller probably would have finished in the top 5 if healthy. And this season, I think he will be right around the top 5, even with the addition of Adams, just because he is a very talented guy. His current ADP is 4, which I like for Waller. and definitely a guy that I would lean back on if you miss out on Kelsey or Andrews. Now, the defense is terrible, and that's one of their cons that doesn't help them out. And they're in a tough division. But the pros are that the same team's coming back with the addition of the best wide receiver, Devontae Adams. Now, last season they went 10-7, surprised a lot of people, even me. I projected 6-11. This season, I think they do one better and go 11-6. I think they tie with the Broncos with the 11-6 record, and I honestly think that the Chiefs have the potential to finish last in the division this season. I think it's going to be very competitive and probably the best division in all of the NFL this coming season. Let's finish on the Los Angeles Chargers, of course. The Chargers were wishing for a better season, but they got third last season at 9-8. But they are bringing back pretty much everybody for this season and trying to improve that offensive line to help them out. Let's talk about the guy that I have a lot of hype for, and that's Justin Herbert. Herbert had a huge season last year, finishing quarterback 2 with over 5,000 passing yards, which was second best, 38 touchdowns, which was third, and 15 interceptions, which was tied for second worst. He also added 3 rushing touchdowns and 302 yards rushing. Now, to me, I think Herbert could be an MVP candidate. I think he could win the MVP, and he could easily finish as the quarterback 1 this season as he continues to improve. I think you take a look at guys that are being drafted around him, and you take a look at Josh Allen and say, yeah, he's got the same guys coming back. But will he improve enough to finish quarterback 1? That's where he's being drafted, which I think it's going to be a fight between him and Herbert again. But also look at the Chargers. They're bringing back the same guys. You're bringing back one of the best running backs in Austin Eckler. You have 2 great wide receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams that we'll talk about in a minute. Right now, Herbert's going quarterback 3, which is good value. I would love to have Herbert as my starting quarterback. In fact, I think that most guys will go Allen, Mahomes, and then Herbert. So if again, like the tight ends, you see Allen go and Mahomes go, you got to jump on Herbert if you got that pick right away. And maybe even potentially take him. I would take him second, maybe even first, because I just love those passing numbers. And I think that he will improve, dropping those interceptions down to somewhere closer to 10 or 12, the touchdowns being around the same, and the yards being pretty close to around the same. So I think he has his floor is just cut off not much lower than what he finished last season. So as long as he's healthy, he's easily, in my opinion, a top 5 quarterback for sure. Top 3 quarterback, I would put him at for sure as well. Running back Austin Eckler. Eckler was a guy I was high on last season, and he proved why. He finished running back 2 behind Jonathan Taylor. Eckler had 911 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns on the ground. He also succeeded in the passing game with 70 receptions, 647 yards, which was first out of running backs, and 8 touchdowns, which was first. That's in the passing game. Eckler upped his rushing yards last season compared to other years, and he was also healthy for one, which was nice. Eckler is also a guy that cares about your fantasy numbers, and he talks about it all the time, which I also appreciate. Even with the addition with Isaiah Spiller, they went out and drafted him. Eckler's still easily a top 5 running back and is currently going as running back 2. I do like Henry, especially non-PPR, better than Eckler, and maybe just a little bit more. Again, I got to look at the numbers when I'm done with this all, because I think Henry, if healthy last season, would have finished as the RB1. So I like Henry just as much, but I think those two are safe at running back 2 or 3. Good ADP for them this season. Jonathan Taylor, a safe play for number 1 overall. Eckler, a safe play as 2 or 3. Same with Derrick Henry. McCaffrey is the guy that will have the highest ceiling because he's been the running back 1, and if he's healthy and can get back to his ways, he's easily, before his injury, was averaging 30 fantasy points a game, but definitely risky coming off those injuries last season. And Henry's coming off the injury as well, so maybe you put a little risk behind that. but he's not a guy that gets injured often. So if he comes back looking good in some of the preseason games, then definitely a guy that, I would be taking maybe slightly ahead of Eckler. But in PPR, I love those receptions from Eckler last season, and nothing's saying that it'll go down. Potentially the rushing could slightly go down because of Spiller, but I don't think it'll make that much of a difference. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, two top wide receivers for the Chargers. Allen and Williams were very similar last season. Allen finished wide receiver 11, Williams wide receiver 12. Allen had 30 more receptions with 106, which was 6th overall, but Williams had 8 more receiving yards, which is nothing, and 3 more touchdowns. He had 9, which is tied for 7th. So I think you can expect this for Allen again this year. I think Allen, his touchdowns will go up for sure. 6 last season. I think they'll go up to probably 8 or 9. And that would put him last season around wide receiver 10. And for Williams, I would say maybe a slight touchdown regression to maybe 7 or 8, but not enough to say he won't be a top 20 wide receiver. And right now, that's about where they're going at the ADP. That's where people value them. Allen, wide receiver 10, Williams, wide receiver 19. Both fair, great average value for them in fantasy, and definitely guys that I would like to have. I'd rather have Allen a little bit more just because he's the better wide receiver. But, they're going to come back, and as long as they're healthy, they're going to do the same as they did last season. Now, tight end Gerald Everett, not much to say about him. He's coming from Seattle. Everett finished as a tight end 20 last season, 48 receptions, 470 yards, 4 touchdowns. This is about what his value is this season. He's going as the tight end 24. Tight end 20 last season. I think he could get there and be in the top 20. Top 15 would be pushing it. But I think his ADP is slightly a little bit lower than what he can do, but not a guy that I'm excited to have on my team. A potential backup maybe, or waiver wire pickup maybe. Now the defense is again what hurts them. Don't draft them. Now the pros are, though, the team brings back the same powerful offense with better offensive line play, but the con is the defense is bad. Last season they go 9-8. That's what I projected they go. This season I think they do 2 better and go 11-6. Now I haven't breaking down the numbers yet, but I have 3 teams in the Raiders, the Chargers, and the Broncos going 11-6. And I have the Chiefs going 10-7. If I had to pick a division winner and somebody that could do better, I think the safest pick and the better pick is the Chargers based off their schedule to win the division. I'd probably say then the Raiders and then the Broncos, just because you do have Russell Wilson, but the team's pretty much the same as what they were last season, who finished last in the division. So if I had to pick one division winner, I'd probably lean towards the Chargers. I think the Chargers have a chance to go to the AFC Championship for sure. I think it'll be them and the Bills fighting out to go to the Super Bowl with the top 2 fantasy quarterbacks going at it in the playoffs, which would be intriguing. But that's the Chargers for you there. I want to thank you guys for watching. Just a short recap. We looked at the AFC West. We took a look at all 4 teams. One of my surprising predictions is that the Chiefs could potentially finish last in the division this season. I also think that Herbert could be the MVP this season, along with finishing as the number 1 quarterback. And I also have very high hopes that Kelsey will go back as the tight end 1 this season. But you take a look at the AFC West, and pretty much everywhere there's fantastic value in fantasy football. You're going to come out of your draft with somebody from the AFC West for sure. And depending on who, Herbert, Eckler, those are guys that I'm going to be targeting most. I would take Devontae Adams as a sleeper. Somebody that could go off would probably be, in my opinion, Cortland Sutton. And I also think that Josh Jacobs could have a pretty good season. But stick with me, guys, as we jump to the NFC North next week. And then we will go South, East, West, followed by my rankings, my sleepers and busts. Those ones you definitely don't want to miss. That'll be coming up about a week or two, probably week 3 of the preseason, but a week or two prior to Labor Day when the preseason ends. That's probably what I'm most excited for, because then I get to kind of break down my rankings at that point. And guys that I'm really excited about drafting this season or an auction league trying to go after. So if you want to continue to follow the journey, I do the homework for you so you don't have to. All you have to do is turn on YouTube at Sports Luck Podcast or on Spotify at Sports Luck Podcast and listen to me. If you're on Spotify, if you go to the YouTube channel, you can see some PowerPoints. If you're on YouTube and you don't want to look at anything, you just want to listen, you can go to Spotify. Both are at Sports Luck Podcast. And you can follow me on Instagram for updates at Sports Luck Podcast. So thank you for listening in for this week. I'm excited to start the NFC next week, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week.